Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Fair Chase podcast. I realize that's exactly how I start most episodes. I've tried to stray away from it, and every single time I get nervous at the last minute and I just say the same thing over again. So, welcome to another episode. It's What's Happening. We're having you guys back. We love to talk hunting, and so glad that you guys all listen to us. Today, I've got a very special guest, Garrett Schlief from Grizzly Stick, president of Grizzly Stick, has agreed to take time out of your day, Garrett, to spend some time with me. So, Garrett, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Garrett, if for people who don't know, I said you're the kind of the president, the head of Grizzly Stick. What is Grizzly Stick? What do you guys do?
Grizzly Stick. So we are a consumer direct arrow and broadhead company. We've been in existence since 1994. We've been around a long time. Started out much differently than we have been over the last 10, 15 years. And just grown into really helping guys on bigger hunts, hunting in Africa, and coming up with systems for bigger animals for guys. That's really kind of been our forte. And now over the last couple of years, really getting into talking to a lot more whitetail guys about shooting whitetails.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, you know, the big game stuff. You guys, if anybody's ever spent time on their website, there's a lot of information, and like you said, it's a lot focused on things like Cape Buffalo or grizz or some bigger animals. But you mentioned whitetail too. Is that like a recent trend, or why are you seeing this kind of surge in whitetail action too now?
Just, for us, when we started out, and you and I had a prior discussion of a little bit on this, is we came out of trad. So we were shooting in Alaska. So we were shooting heavier arrows at bigger animals. So we were trying to get more arrow penetration. As our company grew out of a trad company and started making heavier equipment, just kind of by default, guys hunting bigger animals, looking for different equipment, started looking for us or finding us. A lot of it through word of mouth or through the web or through their guides and PHs. And we really started building systems off the shelf where guys could go hunt Cape Buffalo or go hunt brown bears. That worked really well. So we started eventually going from trad into some of the bigger stuff. And then those guys would come back from their hunts. They were successful, and they'd be like, hey, I'm going on a whitetail hunt wherever they're going, fill in the blank. And hey, I'm looking for something that has a little bit more punch than the other stuff in the market. So really slowly and very organically, even there was a step in there I missed. It went from Africa to elk and moose and brown bear. That would really kind of more elk guys. And then, I'd say really in the last 5 years, more the whitetail market. I don't know if it's as much as just our company, but a lot of the high FOC, Ashby, single bevel stuff started kicking in. More companies started making equipment. So for guys that were looking for that kind of equipment to go hunt with, there was just more options. So it created a bigger buzz in the marketplace for guys to go look at it. And, we've just been sitting there for a long time doing the same thing.
OnX is the title sponsor of our podcast here at the Fair Chase, and it's a must-have app for all of us who love to explore the outdoors. Whether you're hunting or hiking or fly fishing, OnX gives you detailed, accurate maps right at your fingertips. With property boundaries, topographical features, and trail data, you'll always know where you are and where you're headed. You'll also likely be able to figure out where that big buck is headed to. Plus, their offline maps mean you're covered even in the most remote locations. OnX is the ultimate tool for outdoor navigation, making every adventure safer and more enjoyable. Download OnX today and explore with confidence.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, I mean, even when I was a kid, when I started shooting, it had to be probably 1997 or 8 when I kind of first got my bow. I was 10, 11 years old. I mean, that time, and I knew just a little bit of it, just time I was in shops and stuff and the products that were available. It was like you had a light arrow, a fast arrow, and like my Carbon Express camo, camo wrapped Carbon Express. Like I had so many of those arrows. Totally different now.
Yeah. Totally different now. But that was the same kind of thing back to when even I grew up trad, so I'm a little older than you, but we were shooting XX75s and Rocky Mountain Razors. That was kind of that was the go-to for what we were shooting. We were shooting somewhere between 55 and 65 pound longbows, usually, and hunting everything in Alaska with that. And that setup worked okay if you hit everything and everything, you hit them in a good spot and everything went right. It didn't necessarily work as well if you hit anything, especially like a moose and a big bone front shoulder.
Yeah.
That thing would stop on a dime. So that's where we started looking at ways to maximize. We didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea. We were chasing, putting shot in our arrows and sand. Like you've heard a lot of guys
in there somehow.
We didn't know why intrinsically what we were trying to do. We were just we knew somewhere that we needed more weight. We didn't know how to do that. Right. So that sent us on a path. We were already kind of on, and then in about 2005, we were introduced to Dr. Ashby through a mutual acquaintance. My father started the company. I was part of it by that time, and
just for the record, I was a junior in high school, having a heck of a soccer season.
Yeah. I had just left, I think we talked about this. I just left my job at Ducks Unlimited. And so this was my foray into the family business, trying to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So it was kind of set up that way. So, but we were already kind of chasing these things. And then we found Ashby, and then we started reading his reports and all of his stuff. And it was just like, for a lot of people that read it, not everybody, I get it. The light just went off, like, wow, this really makes sense. We understand this. This is what we were chasing anyway. He's the first guy to not only write it down, but there was so many shots over time and so many animals that there wasn't just like anybody's opinion. There was statistical significance in everything that he was doing. And then we got on a path probably about 2007, building equipment, chasing what he had found.
Yeah.
And what, our database and, over the years has really doesn't follow his exactly. There's certain things that we found. A lot of these things, it's opinions, right? You get to a certain level on any of this stuff. My opinion may be a little bit different. What we start arguing over is how far the broadhead is sticking out the offside of any animal.
Right.
It doesn't, at a certain point, let's where we kind of go, we always tend to err on the side of overkill. I want too much, not just enough. I'm always, as guys hunt, how many shot opportunities do you have in your lifetime?
Yeah.
And when you have those shot opportunities, what's your chance to maximize those opportunities and not have lost? If you actually get a shot at an animal and you work as hard as you do to get that shot, that arrow, when it makes contact, better work. Or you want statistically to get that chance up as high as possible.
Yeah.
Quick shout out to another amazing sponsor of ours, Kafaru International. If you're like us and love hunting in some of the toughest places, you know how crucial having the right gear is. Kafaru makes some of the toughest, most reliable backpacks and tents out there, and it's all made right here in America. Whether you're hunting in the backcountry or headed to your favorite deer stand, Kafaru has you covered. Keep your eyes out this year, especially as they're launching a ton of amazing new products like the new Arc frame that just came out. So next time you gear up for an adventure, make sure to check out Kafaru International.
For people who are, who maybe are unfamiliar, and it's funny, we spend a lot of our episodes talking about arrows we've talked to lots of people about different ideas about arrow weight, performance, and everything else. It's a thing hunters think about a lot, and it's something we think about a lot. So we spend a lot of time on it. And for maybe folks who are newer to this, Dr. Ed Ashby, and Garrett, as I go, correct me if I'm wrong, but he spent a lot of time and research on really arrow performance, especially in the context of bow hunting. So Ashby studied things like arrow mass, front of center, or FOC, which I love the run FOC stud in your background, the poster there. We talked like things like broadhead design and, looking at what shaft integrity, kind of how that all comes together in producing this lethal arrow. And so he's a big proponent of heavier arrows with a higher front of center. So front of center, for anybody listening, you take an arrow and you balance it on your finger. How much can you get to the front of the arrow before it balances? And the closer to the front, the higher the FOC. I think that's right.
Yep.
All these. He's basically found and again, I'm oversimplifying, but penetrate better, will push through things like hide and bone. And he would look at, spears and more, when we say traditional archery, I mean like native archery and the tools that they use, how they are to be able to be so lethal against fairly large animals with, bows that maybe aren't, they're not the compound bows that we're using these days. And so, that's the research that he kind of brought in an era where things were we were all looking at fast arrows and getting to the animal quickly, which is important in some way. He had kind of advocated for this heavier, maybe even a slower arrow for different reasons.
You nailed it. For most guys, in a very short Cliff's Notes version, 30 years of research he wrote extensively. There's volumes. You can find it on the foundation pages. You can find it on our page. There's on several pages it's published. You can go read all of his research. Probably the most important thing with the research that we found is it was all outcome driven. Mm-hmm. So there was no, I think this works better. It was, and most of his testing in the later years happened on Asiatic and Cape Buffalo. Yeah. With the Asiatics, the reason why is their ribs would overlap. So he didn't really care what would happen on soft tissue. Most arrows and broadheads work fairly well on soft tissue. It was on hard angles. It was on heavy bone hits. These are the things that, we can't plan for as bow hunters. He wanted to see what happened when the arrow did that.
Yeah.
So with all that research, I think the first thing for most guys, if they've never heard of him, the one I always like to quantify his work when people say it's important or it's not important. Without his research, bow hunting in South Africa would have never got legalized. That was the research that they used to legalize it in South Africa. Once South Africa legalized, most of the 6 or 7 other countries that you can legally bow hunt in now all came with it. South Africa's being the biggest, the most hunting tourists, a lot of guys fall in line with kind of what they do. So that's one way to quantify what he's done. Number 2, it was just basically, hey, if you do these things, regardless of the equipment, we found that it penetrates better no matter what happens. Yeah. So we've taken that with a not necessarily a laser-like focus, but a focus on, we want to focus on the things that he said work. And then we want to keep testing inside that on how to make sure that those products on impact penetrate no matter what we hit. So I think that's a lot of the mentality that it comes behind. A lot of times, and you and I had mentioned this, we talk about it in rifle calibers. I grew up in a household in Alaska that we carried one rifle pretty much for everything. And that rifle was a 375 H&H with 300 solids. We shot everything with it. Black-tailed deer, goats, sheep. That was the rifle we had. And then one of the reasons we had that is because if you walked into a brown bear, you could stop everything right now. You didn't have to discuss anything. Yeah. Right. So it was bigger than it needed to be for everything. So a lot of the mentality came out of that for us when we were trying to fling arrows at a 60-pound longbow at a moose. Like, I need more than enough to make sure that happens, especially if we hit the big bones or things like that. So that's where a lot of that tie into Ashby and what he found in Africa. Guys come in. A lot of people also say a lot of that testing was done on stick bows. It was. A lot of it was done on compounds also. From what we found in building this stuff for almost 20 years, it's pretty universal. It doesn't, the arrows and broadheads do not care what kind of bow they come out. They really don't. Everything works about the same once it's in the air. Yeah. So that'd be another part of it.
This episode is also brought to you by Twoo Gear, innovators in technical hunting clothing. Twoo is a newer company. It's based right here in Michigan, and whether you're hunting elk in the mountains or chasing antelope in the plains or traipsing through swamps after that ruddy buck, Twoo has you covered with premium jackets and pants, merino wool layers, everything you could possibly need to stay comfortable in the woods. Their products are engineered for functionality and durability, ensuring you stay protected in any conditions. Plus, their camo is really effective. We're big fans. So don't take our word for it, though. Go to twoogear.com and check it out.
Well, and for a whitetail guy, you mentioned the rise in kind of whitetail hunter interest and these sorts of things. And if anybody is even just a semi kind of passive observer, can see like you're seeing a rise in actually fixed head again, where it was mechanical for so long. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I've used mechanical extensively and killed most of my deer with about half and half with mechanical broadhead, and they've been great. You run into problems though By the way, that's the funniest mug. I just caught that. So for our listeners who are not seeing, it says "Coffee makes me poop." That's just good, clean fun right there.
That's some insight on who
right.
I am as a person.
But for whitetail guys, most guys who have hunted or gals who have hunted for a long time have run into the problem where you pull a little forward, or the deer kind of moves his kind of elbow or whatever back, and you hit right into that shoulder. You hit that with an expandable broadhead, a mechanical, and for the most part, you're going to have a bad time. I mean, you're going to get a half inch of penetration or whatever. There's got to be a joke there, but you get a half inch of penetration there, and the deer runs away with a mere flesh wound. So to switch to something that has power behind it and can push through, suddenly you can start pulling your shots a little bit further forward and further forward. So you don't have to worry so much about, that bone, and get up in there and just kind of, if you can get into this size area, the size of a kind of a football, like you're going to be okay. And when you're with a mechanical, it's like, you kind of have to, I would always at least kind of err on the side of just aiming a little farther back. Now, this year, I switched to being totally fixed blade for the first time in many years. And it worked great. I mean, what was really nice for me is I never thought about that. I just kind of disregarded hitting a bone and focused on the spot that I really wanted to hit. The part where I ran into I shot 2 decent bucks here in Michigan and recovered them real quick. The thing that made me nervous, and the thing that I've always loved about mechanicals, is sometimes if you get a good hit on a mechanical, it looks like there's a hose spraying blood. And for both of the hits that I had, and these are not Grizzly Stick broadheads, they bled, but it was a little trickier to find that blood trail. That's always something that I hear, Garrett, from folks that are like, "Well, I'm a mechanical guy because of that blood trail." Like, what's your take on that?
We see the same thing. So
Okay.
A couple of things that come into play, and that's what a hunter really needs to consider for themselves, what kind of situational hunting they like to do and where they're at, and shot angles and all those preferences that come into play for guys. Definitely the first one I'd tell guys is with single bevel broadheads, whether we make them or anybody else. If you're shooting animals under 350 pounds and you shoot them broadside in the boiler room, there's a good you're going to shoot right through them like butter. So would a lot of other things. There's no special, right? Through the boiler room. Those broadheads, those single bevels, are made to penetrate no matter what. Number one. Number two, they're made to hit any heavy bone that they make. They're not made to make giant holes. That'd be one. One of the other philosophies that kicks into this is, do you want to make one hole or two? That's a whole nother debate that we could get into at a later time. But so for us and our philosophy, when we're shooting deer, we're trying to shoot through them no matter what. So with the single bevels, what happens for a lot of guys is you are going to get that deer is going to expire before you get any kind of meaningful blood out of them to track them. It's bow hunting. It's a live animal. You can hit them and blood can go everywhere. You can hit them and blood cannot go anywhere. I have lots of pictures and video of both. It depends on what you hit. So as a general rule, over time, that single bevel is not going to make as big of a hole. So that would be the first one. So then we get into fixed 2-blade double bevels. And we have, with adding more weight behind them with whitetails, found great success of, you get a lot of penetration. With a double bevel, it's not going to twist on a heavy bone and break the bone. It's going to hit a heavy bone and try to cut through that bone. We can go through how that works. But on the double bevel, that's going to go through bone. So on animals under 350 pounds with enough head weight and FOC in that arrow, we can hit heavy bone and cut it on animals that size instead of break it. So it opens up more shot for you. And with those 2-blade fixed, and as they get wider and wider, you start opening them up and making bigger and bigger holes. Back to now, you can shoot them almost 2 inches wide, get perfect arrow flight, and you don't have to worry about that thing deploying or at a hard angle skipping. That thing's going to bite
which I had on anything that hits. Last year. Yeah, I mean, I hit them high, and the feathers ate up the mechanical, and I literally had a ball of just feathers. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't even know that was a thing until it
No,
happened.
and that could be a thing. Mechanical shooting through grass. A lot of guys have issues with that too, right? So shot opportunities and shot placement, what you can do with them. Our take on it for most guys is two things. One is, if it's working for you, keep doing it. That's number one. I'm not trying to convince anybody. We're only trying to help guys that are looking for something else. I'm not trying to convince everybody in the world that, and for the right guy, when they find this stuff, they fall in love with it. On what you can do ethically and how you can start hunting, especially whitetails, with a heavy enough head. But to answer your question, yes, on the two blades, you're probably going to see less blood, or your chances of seeing less blood become more important. So what we start doing, and we catch a lot of backlash in the industry for, and we really don't care, because we have enough experience with our own customers and our own video libraries of watching enough of this stuff over time that we just know it works. And that is a lot of times with a high enough FOC and a big enough, not with all equipment, when you meet certain thresholds, just put it on his front shoulders and break his legs. You're going to hit both pegs behind it. And you're going to watch him die from the tree. You're not going to have to worry about blood trail tracking them, because you'll watch them go down. And so it's a much different philosophy. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier.
I can see people getting mad about that.
Well, and they do. And I understand it. I get it. And without any kind of research, or without, having a customer base that we have, and the amount of people that we have, and the amount of media that we personally have access to watching, not guys on TV, Joe Schmo that bought it. Here's my video of me whacking this whitetail. And just, we have a pretty extensive library of that stuff, and watching guys being able to very ethically take animals at different at their lethal distances, with a heavy enough arrow and broadhead setup.
Big thanks to Vortex Optics for sponsoring this podcast as well. Most hunters know how important clear, reliable glass is in the woods. In fact, we don't hit the woods without some form of optics in our hands. Vortex Optics offers a wide range of high-quality binoculars and scopes and rangefinders, things that are perfect for hunting or bird watching or whatever you're doing outside. Their world-class products also come with an amazing warranty. I've actually used it, and it's really fast and easy to use. So whether you're spotting a big bear across a drainage or lining up that perfect shot, make sure you're doing it with Vortex Optics.
Just to rewind for folks, we're talking bevels, right? So a single bevel is a blade that has an angled edge on like one side, like a chisel. So it hits something like a bone, and the broadhead rotates, so it kind of rotates through the bone and tissue. A double bevel is like a knife, where it's both sides. It's like straighter, like it'll go straight through. It won't rotate. And so there are. You
got it. The single bevel is only sharpened on the one side. If you flip it over, it's sharpened on the same side. It's like two offset wedges. As they hit, they want to rotate. So even on soft tissue, or even with air pressure, they'll start to rotate themselves. Not a lot, but I mean, enough that it'll start to, and on impact, especially when it hits anything hard and it starts to meet resistance, it starts to turn very quickly and violently. So instead of trying to hit a bone and cut through it and split it open, it's going to hit that bone and twist and try and break it open. Once we break it open, a couple things happen. Takes a lot more energy for that arrow to break than cut. That's number one. So all things being equal, it just makes it easier to penetrate when you hit a bone with a single bevel than a double. Number two, when you break that bone versus trying to shoot that arrow through a bone, depending on the size of it, there's a lot less drag against that arrow shaft once you hit it and break it. So versus a double, when you're trying to cut through it, and that arrow shaft is going to be trying to push through that bone, right? It's going to create a lot of drag, a lot more resistance. You're not going to generally get as much penetration out of it. So again, when we get into bigger animals, this becomes what we found, it becomes a lot more important than it does in lighter in lighter arrow setups for guys for our whitetails. Over the last couple of years, we've definitely watched that arrow weight, the common arrow weight, creep up. It was 400, then it was 450. Now I think 500 isn't scary anymore. No. I think guys will get to 550. Ashby's heavy bone threshold is 650 grains. And there's a combination. It's not just 650, but it has to have at least 19% forward to center, and then a lot of other things that go in there. But then when you follow all those rules, he couldn't find a bone that you couldn't hit and break. Does that mean that you can't hit and break bones at lighter weights? No, that isn't true. It just isn't statistically significant when you start saying at 650, I don't care what you hit, you're going to break it.
You're going to bust through it.
So it depends. And every shot is different. We don't look at any one shot on really anything. You got to look at 100 shots on 100 animals to really start determining what it is on, what are your chances? Because every shot's a little bit different, right? And where you hit, what angle you hit, how much the animal moves, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah. And that's so just to rewind back again, we're talking Ashby, and you mentioned you're kind of implementing, his ideas when you started started Grizzly Stick. So like, how'd you do that? How'd that go about? You hear of Ashby, you're making arrows. How'd you fuse those things? How did that process go?
Honestly, it was a blind leap of faith. It was, It was, we didn't have our own research at the time. And we didn't have any manufacturing expertise at all internally, trying to figure out how to build something, chasing what he was doing. So it was really, for us, it was all this research that made sense to us, but we had never, and no one had really started building stuff, chasing what he had found. So, that was really, and we had parts of that. We already had tapered arrows. That's a huge part of it. As guys are chasing FOC, a tapered shaft, or our tapered shafts have a 5% FOC built into them without having any head weight, where when you're a parallel, you can't get that weight up.
And and you're saying that your arrows are basically, they start thicker and
thicker, and they taper back to the back end. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. It's so, and with that, they fly through the air much differently. You think of it more of as a pub dart. You put a big brass chunk on the front end of it. You have a little tail with vanes on it for guidance and steering on the back. But instead of, when we add all this weight to the front of these arrows, instead of trying to push that arrow through the air as fast as you can, you're pulling that arrow through the air. And more importantly, you're going to pull the arrow through an animal instead of trying to push it through. It just becomes much more efficient. The tapers, they paradox much differently. Without getting too far in the weeds, they just flex much differently in the air. They only flex on one end. They don't flex on both like a standard parallel. So all things being equal, same arrow weight out of the same poundage bow, it's just a more efficient machine when you hit an animal and you're trying to penetrate into it.
Sure. Actually, that makes a ton of sense. Interesting. So we're talking heavy arrows, and you're experimenting with it. Did you have any concern at the beginning of shooting at distance with something that's heavier? And has that ever been was that a concern?
Internally for us, it wasn't, because we were all trad guys.
Right.
So that was, so we had to learn. And then what we found, and what we've really started to market to and help guys with, was guys were like, how does it shoot at 80? And I'm like, do you hunt at 80? And they'd say no. And I'm like, what's your lethal distance that you hunt at? What's the farthest that you'll shoot at a live animal? And guys would say 40. And I'm like, I don't care how it flies at 80. I only care how it flies at 40.
Yeah.
Any target practice that you do beyond that, or whatever ranges you do, that's on, you can do that. And guys, common guys with a 70-pound bow and a 650 grain arrow, they get an 80-yard pin. So is it going to be as flat as a lighter arrow? No. When you get there, is it hard to stop it? Yes. So it's, it's those trade-offs on what you want to do, and when you get out to distance and you want to hit stuff. But what we found is just, it really didn't matter as much for guys when they were hunting whitetails as they went down in weight. One of the things that we found for them is you just wanted to keep your FOC up. Yeah. And keeping your FOC up, it's just, with the tapered shafts, it's a lot easier to do that, all things being equal. Two shafts weigh the same, right? One's tapered, one's not. Again, the one with the taper in it's going to have 5 to 6% FOC built into it just because of the taper.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting to know, and it's a thing we hear about it a lot. It's like, well, flatter shooting,
And I think that's where guys, when you're shooting tapered arrows with high FOC, it flies and handles much differently than shooting a parallel with a bunch of head weight on the front of it. So that's the first thing. And like we did with you, I said, let's set you up with a test kit. You can put this on, you get it, you shoot it on your bow. And instead of me telling you what you should expect to see, you tell me what you see when you actually shoot it.
Yeah.
For most guys, like we said, if they go from 500 grains to, as an example, 650, and they don't have to go that heavy, but if guys go that heavy, they'll see, for most guys at 70-pound bow, they're not going to touch their 20, 30, and a lot of guys don't even touch their 40-yard pins. over 40 yards, your pin gaps are going to open up more than they would with a light arrow. But on the trade-off, once you're sighted in and you can range, the difference is how much penetration you can get out of that arrow. It's not as flat, but man, that thing is hard to stop at longer distances.
Right. And you're looking at what do you value, with your arrow, right? This is
what do you want, right?
Yeah.
That's really, you nailed it. And that's what I said. It's not necessarily for everybody. For certain guys, it's like, I've been looking for this, certain things becomes intrinsically more popular with saddle guys. It's really popular, whether it's our stuff or high FOC is they get really weird situations where they get really unique shots. And most of those guys, a lot of guys, especially the urban guys, this thing needs to die inside this acre and a half that I'm on, right? I can't have it wander out into the parking lot. So, it's
bleeding out like
it's a much different, I'm trying to overkill at this point, right? I'm trying to knock him off his feet. So it's a much different idea. And so when you build stuff like, hey, I could knock down Cape Buffalo, or I could shoot through a Cape Buffalo, that, guys that are looking for that kind of stuff are like, holy cow. And I'm like, you don't have to go that heavy, but you get the general idea. We start following certain rules and certain guidelines, depending on what you're hunting, I can get you to shoot through it. So, and really, if guys that are looking to do that, shoot through stuff versus the anxiety of hitting heavy bone, the anxiety of too far forward or too far back, or all that anxiety versus
I don't want to think about that.
I want to shoot them, right? There's that. And the other part I talk to guys about in lethal distance, a lot of the general dogma that you'll get in the industry is guys will talk about, still to this day, they talk about shot placement. And it's one of those things that I just don't understand. That for me, that's an argument that would come out of target archery. It doesn't come out of hunting. For all the videos that we have over the years of whitetails, I think we talked about this a little bit too, but for all the videos that we have, any whitetail that's standing still that I've ever seen an arrow shot at, unless there's high wind, which would be the only time I've seen it a couple times, those deer move before that arrow gets there.
Yeah.
They absolutely move. So when guys say, oh, it's shot placement, I'm like, shot placement at what? We're shooting at a live animal. Sometimes they duck, sometimes they jump, sometimes they go away, sometimes they come towards you. I don't know what's going to happen. So when you say shot placement, I'm saying, yes, I'm picking a spot with a heavier arrow, knowing that if he moves, because he's probably going to move, that no matter where that arrow ends up actually making contact with him or her, that it's going to penetrate no matter what I hit, bone included. And so back to the odds of penetration.
Well, I shot a buck this year, working a licking branch. It's totally focused. It's rubbing sticks in its eyes. It's not paying any attention at all. And I shot it, and it definitely moved. It was a 23 2-yard shot, and it was totally focused. It had something literally in its eye when I shot it. And it moved. They're turned up, whitetails especially.
Yeah, that's where I've never run. And we can make arguments for some of the things some of the benefits that you get for heavy arrows in those same shot situations. Number one, again, that arrow is going to penetrate, high FOC, high mechanical advantage on the broadheads. We start chasing all that stuff. Yeah. Number two, I know once that deer, and we talked about this a little bit too, once I am zeroed in with that kind of a setup for whitetails or any other animal out to your lethal range, I'm comfortable. And for me as a trad guy, that's only 20 yards. Most guys bow hunting, it's 30 to 40, depending on where that is for most guys. Knowing that at 30 yards, if you're dialed in, if anybody steps 1 foot inside that circle, you can attack at any time. I can go, I'm going to penetrate. I can break bones if I want to. I can shoot you broadside if I want to. Back to, it just gives guys a lot more opportunities and shot opportunities by the time an animal actually enters that zone for them, that they can shoot ethically at them and kill them.
Well, and you start to think, and people sometimes get upset about this, but the dreaded frontal shot, which I personally love. I saw it work very well for me this year on a moose. And, for arrows, it works pretty well too, if you have the right setup, right?
You got to have the right setup. In rifles, when we talked about this too, on a moose, if you had a 270 Win Mag on that hunt that you were on, and he was at the same distance, and somebody said, I don't care how heavy the bullet weight is on that either. Right. And they said frontal, I'd wave you off. I said, no, that's not a good idea. Right. Yeah. With the right caliber and the right bullet, it's the most lethal thing. You can't kill them any faster. And so, right.
It's just so much force, it's
well,
right.
And what I like about it is no matter where you come in from the front, it's all goodies. I mean, I don't care what you hit. There's 15 ways you can kill them once it penetrates through the front chest.
Right.
Our biggest one has always been on the arrow side that most guys don't talk about a lot. As you penetrate back, once you tap the diaphragm, that's it. That's it. Yeah. You can't expand anymore. The computer is going to turn off. You got 30 seconds. Set the clock. So we do like it, and that is one of the. But you'll catch a lot of people say, "Hey, that's not ethical." And my response to that always, with the wrong equipment, you're absolutely right. With the right equipment, it's the most ethical thing you can do. We have a significant amount of video on our website of frontal shots on whitetails all the way up to Cape Buffalo. And then not only just the frontal shot, but then the entire postmortem with the professional hunter, with the PH behind that, talking about the penetration and how fast. I don't think you can kill them that fast with a rifle as shooting them from the front. You run a spear through them back to, and it comes out the back end, man. Things go down in under 25 seconds.
Now, at what point when you're messing with it at the beginning of Grizzly Stick, was it just like, this is what I need, this is it? Like, when did the light kind of come on?
So we're small. We always have been. A number of employees. So a lot of multitasking inside the company. There was one point probably about 10 or 12 years ago with the Cape Buffalo. We were constantly just trying to explain to people, and it would seem like a fight. And at one point, somewhere along the line with that, we were kept posting pictures and video, and where it clicked in my head where I don't have to explain this anymore. Like it doesn't, you either want to do this or you don't with this, but I don't have to feel like I have to, there's such a big pool of success that you can look at for guys doing this, that I don't really feel like we need to justify or explain how or why we do that anymore on those animals. And still Cape Buffalo for us was always a big one, just because there's not many things bigger. That's usually that's the pinnacle animal for most guys, if they ever get that far. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a pretty big one. And it's usually the one it's the most accessible and the most affordable of the big five. So when you get into a lot of the other big five, I mean, that stuff makes goat hunt, sheep hunts start to look cheap too. Well, not sheep hunts, but you get the idea. I mean, that's some big money stuff that you start hunting. And so I think that was probably when the light switch went off. I think for me, it took a couple times, moose hunting for me. Shooting frontal, or for me, it wasn't shooting frontal as much as it was shooting through the shoulder on purpose.
With the recurve.
With a longbow, So 825 grain arrows, 62 pound longbow, inside 20, and trying to convince yourself on a quartering away shot that you want to put it on a shoulder and pull the trigger. For us, we struggled with it, and I talked to a lot of the guys about the frontal stuff. We had guys doing this for years and sending pictures to us, especially on elk. Bugling an elk, you stand there at 14 yards, right? And they're drilling them, a lot heavier setups than we even recommend now. This was probably in the 800 grain range. A lot of guys were doing this at the beginning.
Basically a log. You're throwing a log at them.
It's a log with all the weight in the front, right? It's all in the front. And so, and they're sending me pictures of, broadhead sticking 14 inches out as hammy. And you're like, I've never seen anything die this fast. And you guys should talk about this. And we were like, you are nuts. Yeah. That's a third rail for manufacturers. Like it goes against ethically a lot of the things that I grew up and learned and my own shot selection, my own hunting experiences, and back to with the right equipment. And we just kept seeing guys do it. And they kept saying the same thing. I've never seen anything die this fast. So then it became on us. Hey, I actually want to physically do this myself on a big animal, see what happens. Before I'm ever going to recommend this to anybody else. And I've never seen a moose go down that fast. So it goes, okay. With the right equipment, you can do things differently that would be outside of the norm of what the standard archery industry would be. Yeah. I don't condone or I don't recommend guys do that with normal setups. And I didn't hear me. I didn't say that you have to go do it with my setup. If you follow the Ashby things, those rules, and you stack enough of those in there, ethically, it just becomes about the most lethal thing you can do to hit them. So and more of a proponent of that. When you really start doing this for a while, you hear it a lot in guys that carve duck decoys. After a certain while, old carvers stop hunting. I haven't stopped hunting, but when you build enough arrows and broadheads for guys, especially for big things in Africa, you start having a little bit more conscience and connection with those animals. And what I've always felt like, if we're going to build this equipment as arrowsmiths, when we're building it, your responsibility is going to be to put that animal down as quickly as possible, regardless of the situation.
Yep.
So we always default to that in our thought process when we're making recommendations to guy. We always want to go more than enough, not that. With that being said, though, we got a lot of guys shooting 550 grain setups with double bevels at whitetails and just, tearing them apart with those kind of setups.
Well, I started to come around, if anybody's listened to the show for any amount of time, I mess around with setups. I'm always tinkering and trying new stuff, right? This idea or this way of thinking is kind of hit home for me when I grew up really shooting a 30-30 rifle in the deer woods in Michigan, right? Like lever action. I had no zoom on my scope. I had the over under sights. Shot most of my deer with the iron sights, right? Started taking my 300 Win Mag out, and
the retina detacher.
Yeah, exactly. And boy, did I find that the deer didn't run so far, and I could use that same rifle that I was comfortable with pretty much for almost everything that I would ever hunt. And it was I like just having one thing, I don't want to mess, and I want something that is overkill on most things and, and enough for the really, really big things. So I started thinking about arrows the same way and my archery the same way. I'd be like, well, I wouldn't use this arrow if I were to, do an elk or a moose hunt. I would, this is too light. It's like, well, why not? And like I said, I was, out turkey hunting, and we kind of turkey hunt a little bit different here. No blinds or anything like that. We're in public land, and we're just calling them and hiding, and trying to get it going. And that's, we love it. It's super fun. It takes a lot of work, but it's like when you get a moment and you get a turkey in, and you want to be able to put that thing down. It takes forever to get that to work in the right circumstance where you have cover and you can draw your bow and all that. And this past year, hitting a turkey with my expandable, and literally it bounced off of it. I did hit it high. It wasn't a great shot, but it's like, how did I eat up that much feather and some drops of blood, and this thing just kind of left like it was fine. It's like, well, maybe a little overkill is okay, for a turkey. And from there, it's like, well, why not deer? Well, why not,
And we always look at it, when it does that, that's underkill, right? We were at underkill. We weren't at overkill. So that's, there's still room that you can go back to. We'll see a lot of customers over the years. We don't have a massive amount, but for the size of our company and building stuff, you'd mentioned, possibly goat hunting this next year. How many guys will have shooting goats with heavy arrows? How many guys shooting sheep? And, ranged out to 80 yards with those heavier setups, mainly because one of their big things is wind drift is a big thing. An arrow getting pushed around, if it's raining or blowing at all, that'd be one part of it. The other part of it is, especially when we get into goat hunting and sheep too, but definitely into goat hunting, I'm trying to put that guy down as fast as possible to keep that retrieve as short as possible. And, a lot of times, the things that you can do to them in that situation. So for certain guys, that's what, in their mindset, that's what they're looking for. I want to be able to, I could shoot them with a 300 Win Mag, but maybe I'm shooting with a 338 because I want a little bit heavier bullet, and I want to pin both shoulders and knock them down.
Yep.
So
anchor them right there.
It really depends on what you're kind of doing. And it's the same philosophy in bullet weights as it is in arrows. You can go, and I think you nailed it. And we've always joked about internally that old saying, beware of the man that carries one rifle. It's the same thing. They shoot one rifle really well. That's better than being able to go up and down on the scale.
Yep.
That was a lot of what we had looked at is I want to be able to shoot really big animals. I only shoot to 20 yards. So I really don't care about distance. So anything enters a 20-yard circle, I want to be able to shoot it. And regardless of what that is. So one thing works for everything at my distance. And so guys that are looking, like I said, guys that are looking for that, there's a lot of this aha moment. The other big reason you seem like you get a lot of guys that'll come to us the first time is, we've talked about this. They come to us through pain. It's fill in the blank. It's worse than the high school breakup story. I shot X number of deer, one, whatever it is, over, and, I hit it. It was too far back. It was too far forward. Never saw him again. Never, or we saw him on cam, a week later, he seemed fine or whatever that is, right? The story is. And I said, I understand. And then guys will be like, I don't ever want to do that. What you had mentioned is, I think was really important at the beginning when we started talking is, on whitetails with mechanicals, for you personally, that was probably somewhere around 50-50. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's kind of, those odds are way too low for me because it's so hard for me to get a shot. So I would rather have less shot opportunities because I can't shoot as far. But when I get those shot opportunities, my chances of success, because that arrow is going to penetrate, go higher. So again,
it's in your bubble, like you were saying.
You're in your zone, right? I'm out to this distance. You step inside of it, you're fried chicken. That's it. That's how I feel about it. Yep. I think for me also, and for a lot of guys, the part that it'll give me, and it was a big one for me, I used to have a tremendous amount of anxiety when I was younger, hunting moose, and not shooting them. I wasn't worried about shooting them. I was worried about shooting them, hitting them, and losing them. Yeah. And it was, there's nothing worse. I mean, it's awful. And the feeling that you get, everybody's gone through it. Anybody that's gone, you think
about it a lot.
Oh, and for me, even the anxiety is that first half hour tracking them. Right. Oh, and you just like, this is not the good, highest. Right. Yeah. It's like, this is not, or it's not good or whatever that is. Right. So I hated that. And it took me a while, even with shooting this stuff and basically, building it when no one else was building it, to gain that confidence to now, you at 20 yards, you're in trouble. Don't do it. Because if you do, here it comes. And really, I'm not so concerned about angle is how I'm going to attack you. And for me, even now, is how am I going to attack you? And I'm going to try to break something, whether it's on the near side or the far side. I want to try to break something, because if I penetrate through and I break something, my experience is, a lot of times I can watch it go down. I'll see it on the ground. I can watch it go down. You can put stuff down pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's helpful. And like you said, and when you have that thought process, when you've got that confidence, it's really what it is. If you have the confidence, like if something's here, it's dead. You have that with a rifle a lot when you're deer hunting, and it's like
one more step,
you're done. Like there's just that's just really it. And so to have that with archery, where there are mind games you kind of have to go through when you're an archer. Like you think about things like, what if he ducks? What if this? What if this? All that happens in this moment. Even the psychological impact that you have of just cutting some of that out and knowing, all right, he's in here. I get like a ton of different angles on this animal, and it's done. It's a big deal.
It's a different way of going about business. That's it. And that's really probably the thing that I try to tell guys, depending on how you want to do it. There's still a lot of guys that have a lot of success and enjoy doing things kind of the way. Again, as we're watching everything kind of creep up in weight, 125 seems like it's pretty common now, and most heads now is, where before it was just hundreds. So you start seeing that come up. You start seeing more of the mainstream, not the little guys, but the mainstream arrow companies talking about FOC and any kind of regularity. They never did that before. It's kind of where the market shifted to. Back to what we found with the Ashby stuff is you start following it. Some guys don't like it and some guys do. But what we found is you can't dispute that it works. That's right. He
spent more time than most people are ever going to spend trying to figure out how arrows work.
Anytime you get guys that want to argue with it, I was like, there's 30 years of research that you can go read. I don't know how many papers are written that you can go read. They're online. I'm like, as soon as you write that much, if you wrote half of that, then let's have a discussion. But until that time, you're just giving your opinion. Or I've been a bow hunter for 40 years, and you hear that, I'm like, great. Is that documented? Everybody goes and looks at Ashby stuff and they can go and say yes or no. I'm like, where's your research? So people can go look at it and see, you can put it out in the world and people can say yes or no.
Their research is their sample size is quite a bit small. Even if you're hunting for 40 years and you say you shoot 40 animals, an animal a year.
Yeah.
It's still not a very big sample size, really.
It's nothing. I mean, it really isn't. So back to his sample sizes were so large. And it was over so much time. And again, he wasn't trying to set out on, hey, I think this is going to work better. He would make a bunch of arrows in all different configurations. He'd shoot them into animals. And this is all cold animals. A lot of that was in Africa, was on cold animals, and in Australia, those are cold buffalo. So rifle cold, within a half hour, you're plunking arrows into them. So, he's testing every day, plunking arrows into stuff. Yeah. And so when you start looking at just the sheer volume of the research and what he found, and again, he didn't set out with any one goal. I just know that when I kept doing this, it just kept working better. Yeah. So I kept going down that road. It wasn't like, oh, I have a theory and then I'm going to go test it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have any bias. You don't go in with any like hoping this happens, which is how I wrote most of my college papers. It's like, I'm gonna write a paper about this. And let's whip it out. I'm finding only the points that support me. I'm handing it in. And I'll take my C+.
Right. Exactly. Wow. You and I would have been together in college. Yeah, that was, and I mean, that was really where we sat down, or for me, and you had asked originally, how did you just get into this, or how did you start doing it? It was a blind leap of faith. Yep. We were at the time probably the largest trad company outside of Three Rivers in the U.S. We were making the tabs and gloves and selling to Cabela's and all the big pro shops. And so we were doing that. And at the time we made arrows, but we didn't even make broadheads. And I read this and I'm like, I think we're going to stop making everything that we make, and we're going to focus on this. Yeah. And a lot of people would think that's nuts. And it probably in a lot of ways was. In my own experience with just in business and looking at a lot of other things, having done this for as long as I have now, it's rarely that the first guy is ever the breakthrough guy ever anyway. So that, that was always on our mind. And it was also just to stay alive. I have mad respect for any archery company that's over 5 years old, much less 10. It's just hard to do. Broadhead companies in particular, they're like running backs in the NFL. You got a 4-year lifespan, and that's
you're out
for most guys. I mean, there are exceptions to those rules for sure. So for us, it was always at first just be able to stick around long enough. And there's nothing. We make 2 million broadheads. It's people always like, hey, can you patent this? And they're like, patent it. I have drawings back 10,000 years old on this stuff. I mean, I don't know. There's nothing to patent. So on kind of what you want to do and how you want to do it.
Yeah. Well, Garrett, we're coming up on time. This is the end. For people who are interested in learning more, maybe they want to read more about Ashby's stuff, read more about some of the stuff that you're putting out, the tests you're running, the animals, and so on. How can they find that information? Where should they go?
So the easiest place is grizzlystick.com. You can Google us or just go to the website.
Stick without a C, by the way.
Stick without a C. It still comes up everywhere. Okay. You plug it in, it's going to come up. On there, there's all the Ashby reports that have ever been published on there. Then there's all of our own research, and then just a vast array of testimonials that guys can go through on all kinds of different animals. So it's broken down into categories from whitetail all the way up to Cape buffalo and the African Big Five. So you can really go read, and we have it broken down on there on how guys, what kind of setups we recommend for those different size animals. And on that, talk a lot about also testing and why we recommend it. This is different than what a lot of guys have done. So we always like to have guys test first and make sure a couple things. Number one, that we can get arrow flight. And number two, as you start shooting something in this, if you're thinking about it, make sure this is what you want to do. Like this is different than what a lot of guys are doing. So I'm like, get 2 arrows and shoot it first. And you tell me if you like it versus me trying to convince you of it. So, that would be the first. So Grizzly Stick, there's 800 numbers. We're on the socials. So you can see, a lot of the stuff. All of our media generated is from customers. We don't have any kind of relationships outside of, we do a lot with Whitetail Adrenaline, just because Jared likes it and likes shooting heavy stuff. So we do a lot with those guys over the years. But outside of that, it's pretty much just all customer driven on their success stories, on things that they've done and gone and hunted, and what happened when they actually hit an animal with an arrow that we built them.
Awesome. Well, Garrett, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Guys, go check it out. Fascinating stuff. Really important. This is the time of year to spend thinking about it and making plans for next year, whether it be spring or fall hunts you got planned. Stay tuned. We got some great stuff coming out here in the next couple of weeks, and really appreciate y'all tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.